1989, and not a whole lot of years later, I'm happy to say, became the editor for Jon Talton.
AKA DW.
Yes, he calls me Deadline Woman because I'm the one who's always, yeah, there's the editor in the newsroom. There's also the editor at the publishing company. This is Jon, where is it, right? You have to use that or there's no point in having it. The microphone.
No, I understand that. I was trained in theater. This is your turn. You got to tell them the story about the real way you got your name, and then I'll talk.
No, you tell it. You do it much better than I do.
Well, I mean, I was sitting in a bar, and she walks in. No, that's not actually true.
It actually was a bar at a conference.
Yeah, it probably
It was in Texas. I think it was in El Paso.
Oh God, yeah.
See?
El Paso.
Right. There was nothing else to do but go to the bar.
Potential, and yet it's El Paso. But anyway, I wrote the thriller Deadline Man, and it's the only thriller I've ever written, which is a totally different genre from mysteries. And Barbara read a few pages, and she sent it back, and she said, "Go get Michael Connolly's book, Persuader, and read that. Just read the first chapter. You don't have to read it anymore. Not Connolly, Lee Child's book, Persuader. You don't have to read the rest of it. Just read the first chapter, and you'll see the difference between a mystery and a thriller." That's for all of you who are aspiring writers, and I hope you'll remember me when you make it big. You just read the first chapter, and it's absolutely, you can't put it down from there. Because the first time I read a Lee Child book, I was like, oh, give me a break. I'm bored. You know, it's like John D. McDonald, the bed, the 4.5 women per book, and all of that. But Persuader is a damn good book, and it absolutely shows you the difference. So I wrote this thriller set in Seattle. It's the only newspaper book I've ever written. And the title is Deadline Man, and it's one of maybe three that I'm actually a little bit proud of that I've written. And so in our correspondence, Barbara addresses me as DM, Deadline Man, and I address her as DW, Deadline Woman.
We could have been much ruder, right? But we said, actually, I lied. When we walked into the bar in El Paso where Jon was actually sitting, that was to take over the David Mappstone series at, was it maybe book 5? Because Deadline Man came along later.
Deadline Man came along later because the real second book in the David Mappstone series is called Cactus Heart. And my editor at St. Martin's, Ruth Cavan, God rest her soul, who was an eminence in the field of mystery book editing, when I published Concrete Desert with St. Martin's, I thought I'm just going to write 3, and if it doesn't work out, I'm going to go do something else, be a CPA, whatever, you know, go teach history at a college, whatever. And so she said, well, I want to publish Camelback Falls, which is the 3rd book in the series. And I just don't know how to even fix Cactus Heart. It has too much sex. And Ruth was about 83 at the time. Every day she took the train into the Flatiron Building in Manhattan, and this was really a burr under my saddle, even though I had a New York publishing house, that I couldn't get Cactus Heart published. And so Barbara took a look at it, and she said, that's right, just about the right amount of sex. Let's do it. And the rest is history. We've been together since then.
I was in my 60s then, so perhaps it had something more to do. No, it's been wonderful to work with Jon, and I think it's been a great partnership. You know, we go back and forth. Sometimes it's a little testy on one side or the other, but we always get to the right place in the end, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I think you, having spent many years as a newspaper editor, I think that Barbara is a superb editor. She doesn't try to make it hers. She tries to bring out the best in the author. And I really can't think of much of a testy exchange. It's a great collaboration, corroboration, and I owe you much, and I thank you.
You are entirely welcome. You've given me hours and hours of pleasure. Now, Deadline Man is a standalone, and Jon has written, is it 2 or 3 books set in Cincinnati, where once you worked, which I really like and which many of you may not have heard of. But one of these days you might write another, because I really like that character.
Yeah, the Cincinnati Case Books are a series set in Cincinnati. There are 2, and I used to live there, and Cincinnati is just, it's such a beautiful city. It's so interesting. And I've written 2. I would write another one, but they just don't sell as well as the other books. And I don't want you to think that I'm so shallow as to just be in this as a commercial venture, but I hope you'll all buy multiple books tonight. But I think Cincinnati makes just as interesting a character as Phoenix does, but for some reason, kind of like Denver and a host of other cities, the books set there just don't seem to do well.
Well, I like it. Partly it's based upon your own experience with your spine, and partly draws on your medical background. When you were you an paramedic, right?
Yeah, I was an EMT3 paramedic registered.
Right. So they're hospital mysteries, or at least they have a connection to all that, which I think Jon writes with real authenticity, just like Deadline Man. But anyway, we're actually here to talk about David Mapstone and the Don Bolles case. How many of you lived in Phoenix at the time of the Don Bolles murder? A lot of you, right? So you know that it was botched up in all directions, and we don't really know for sure who all the perps were. But what Jon has brought to this case, and it's in the background. It's not that he's solving the Don Bolles case. There are things in the present that go back to it. But you wrote a book called A Brief History of Phoenix for a small publisher that does all kinds of regional history and all the rest. Very nice, very good publisher. And that material clearly has informed so much of the background in Bomb Shelter.
Well, and I grew up here, and I have
that too.
I have a personal connection to the day Don Bolles was killed.
Which was you were there, but not quite. You were down the street.
Well, no, I wasn't down the street. I was on duty, and my partner and I were one call rotation away from that. And we picked up what's called a 962, an auto incident with injuries, at 16th Street and Southern, which back in those days, this is 1976, it was just rural. And so we responded to the 962. 1 minute later, the Hotel Clarendon bombing comes in. A friend of mine responded, was there, heard the words. I do want to say at the outset that this is fiction. Ever since I started writing the Mapstone series, people have been after me to have Mapstone solve the Bolles case. And I have shied away from that for a couple of reasons. One is I did not want to appear to be exploiting a tragedy. He has family members still alive, but that would never stop a writer. As Sharon Stone says in Basic Instinct, let the world beware, I'm a writer. But the second reason is it is very intimidating because it is a rabbit hole. It is the Cecil B. DeMille of murder, and it is just to deal with the factual case. There's been an enormous amount of journalism done. Dave Wagner has a very good book called The Politics of Murder. I think he has another edition coming out that goes far as in a book length form, getting close to the truth. Now, having said that, I spent years researching the case.
You might want to give those people who aren't familiar
that's a good point. I forget it that like there's 3 of us here who are from here and nobody else knows, but in June 1976, what was the date? June 2nd, 1976, Don Bowles, who was a reporter for the Arizona Republic, he had been an investigative reporter, was off the investigative beat, at least for the time being. He went to meet somebody at the Clarendon House Hotel, and somebody didn't show up. I'm not going to tell you too much, but then he went back outside. He got in his car. There was a dynamite bomb under the car. It exploded. He was mortally injured, and it was the first time in modern American history since the run him out of town on a rail that a journalist from a major paper had been murdered and brought down all sorts of heat and calumny on Phoenix and exposed for a very brief moment the incredible degree of corruption and organized crime here. And so
There's some water here for you if you'd like it.
thanks. So that's the starting point. But this, I don't want to say too much about the factual case because I then take it and fictionalize it. But it's so complex, and the investigation is so complex. And but I did a tremendous amount of research. I spent hours and hours with detectives who investigated and helped break the case. I think I bring a number of new things to the real case, but you have to pick them out because, as I say, this is fiction. And then at the end of the day, what I had to do was take all of this and not just go blah, 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 Ginger, blah, blah, blah. I had to turn it into what I would hope to be a compelling mystery with David and the cast and the requisite number of car chases, gunfights, and sex scenes. When Barbara read it, she sent me an email and she said, DM, terrific story, about the right amount of sex.
But way too much driving around Phoenix. So I didn't go after cutting back the sex, but I made him have a shorter car ride as we're going along.
Hey, that's just the lifestyle here.
True. What I found especially interesting, I didn't grow up in Phoenix, but I've been here since 1950, off and on. I didn't move here till 1986. Is all the history that Jon brings in, not just about the city and landmarks, but he talks about real people in this book, especially the Goldwaters and Harry Rosenzweig. And while I think a lot of you might be really surprised at what you read, and the part I thought that you probably brought over from your brief history of Phoenix and your own knowledge was the crime and the political dealings and so forth that were going on at this period.
Well, part of this is that my mother was deeply involved in Phoenix and Arizona politics and water policy, and so she knew a lot of these people. And then I was trained as a historian, always had a history Jones, always wanted to know more about this place. The veneer that is Phoenix is nothing like the reality, which makes it all the more compelling. And so when I wrote the Arcadia book, it was just kind of like a brain dump. Where I do the real history writing is on the blog Rogue Columnist. You'll find it on roguecolumnist.com, or Use the Tubes, as Ted Stevens said. And there's a part of Rogue Columnist called Phoenix 101 that has a lot of history columns on the city especially, and then also the valley. That's one of my pet peeves, because I think Silicon Valley, San Fernando Valley, the Red River Valley of the North or of the South, the Valley of the Jolly Ho Green Giant. Oh, you mean the Salt River Valley, when you've got one of the most magical city names on earth, Phoenix. Why would you not use that? You know, people will always say to me, I'm from Chicago. They're not from Chicago. They're from somewhere near Chicago, but they claim that. People here will say, and somebody actually said this to me, I made the mistake of signing up for a thing with the Phoenix Public Library where they auction off like a dinner with you and somebody else who's famous, and I won't mention the other famous person to protect the innocent, but the person who bought this, I have no idea why they bought this. And maybe his wife made him or something. But anyway, so they come to our place, our Midtown condo, for, I'll have to come over there and kill you if you don't mute your cell phones. But I mean that in a Christian way. Anyway, this guy comes over and we make him dinner and all of this, and there's just nothing to talk about. But he wants to make sure that we know that he's from South Chandler. And I just thought, is that a thing? Because when I was here, South Chandler was alfalfa fields, or is it a badass thing like, you know, when the next mapstone will be South Chandler rules, or am I supposed to be impressed? Anyway.
Well, when I first came here, Scottsdale had 2 paved roads. It was not yet incorporated. And, you know, now my husband and I live north of Shea, and we're not even at the city center. You know, I mean, it's just unbelievable how it has grown. But that's part of what you touch on in the book, really, is there was a lot of image making going on. You know, how to bring people to Phoenix and so forth. And part of what goes on in the whole, you know, time of the Bowles case was a lot of political maneuvering in, as I say, burnishing up the image of Phoenix to get people to come here. And they didn't want all this dark underbelly to show up and scare all the potential tourists or homeowners from North Dakota.
Sure, I mean, land fraud and crime is as old as...
It's a little shout out to Jana there on North Dakota. Sorry.
Look, North Dakota has the second largest concentration of nuclear weapons in the country after Washington State, so do not mess with North Dakota. You know, there's a photo of a Minuteman missile silo door where the crew goes in, and it's painted like a Domino's box, and it says delivered anywhere in the world in 30 minutes or less, or the next one's free.
I love it. So, how does the modern story, how does Mapstone get involved? At least give us, you know, the hook into the modern tale.
The typical Mapstone conceit or trope is that he is investigating a historic case and a contemporary case at the same time. And in this case, if you are new, if you are new to the series and you were merely attracted here tonight by my height and my lithe dancer-like body, I would urge you to read one of the first 5 books first. I mean, you can get it at the library. I'm not just shamefully whoring myself here, but you can also buy it. I'm a really good whore. But read one of the first 5, and then read South Phoenix Rules, which starts a new story arc. And then The Bomb Shelter starts yet another new story arc. And so I don't want to spoil it for too many people, but my sheriff is Mike Peralta, who is a tough guy, but he respects civil rights, and he's Hispanic, and he's not that criminal whose name I will not mention. And you know, Mapstone has been working on cold cases now for years, but he approaches it as a historian because that is what he was. He spent a few years as a young man in the sheriff's department as a deputy on patrol. It's a little bit like me in my paramedic days, and then he went off and got his PhD and taught in places around the country, and when we meet him in Concrete Desert, he has been denied tenure at San Diego State University, and just a little bit of academic inside humor. No offense to any Aztecs who are here, but I mean, if you're denied tenure at San Diego State, you're out of beer. And so he comes back to Phoenix, where his grandparents' house. He still owns it in the Willow, what's now the Willow Historic District. It wasn't when he was growing up. He intends to sell the house and move on, and he ends up staying, working for Peralta, solving cold cases using the historian's method. And that's what we have here with the bombing of this reporter. It's the 40th anniversary, but because of timing, this is the hardest book I ever wrote, and it took the longest. And I'm not as spry as I used to be, and my day job is very demanding. I had to time it for 1978 when it happens, so that it could come out in 2018. But it had to be in the 70s. But as Mapstone begins his investigation, there's real live threats and danger that suddenly descend that seem to be directly related to this 1978 bombing. And other than that, you're either going to have to read it or just buy it.
You know, I'm the one who's the bookseller here. You'll notice I haven't said buy it, right? But that's okay, because we're with Jon. Well, I mean, the thing is, 1978 is not that far back, so clearly there are people still alive who were participants or observers or, you know, just lived here, still alive. But that, you know, and that's important, because if he's going to work this case, he does have to find actual people to interrogate.
Right. I mean, it always helps to do this. In Cactus Heart, he investigates a case from the 1940s, but there's still some people alive, and there are plenty of people still alive from the 1970s who he can still track down and talk to. The burden is on me, because there are people who were alive then, like Jana, who will cast a very careful eye on what I say and fictionalize, and that's why I go back to this is fiction. This is what I've made myself using facts.
Is there any reason why we can't review a bit of the actual history of the Bowles case for people who don't know it? I mean, he went in to meet somebody, he comes out to the Clarendon parking lot, he starts his car, it blows up, and tragically it didn't kill him. It really would have been so much kinder if the bomb had killed him on the spot, because it was a long and several hideous days, I think. Maybe even longer than that.
I think it was 9 days.
Right. I mean, it was just torture, you know.
It was, I mean, John Sellers, who was one of the PPD detectives, said he'd never seen a human being suffer so much. There were 3 people arrested, 3 men. It's hard for me now, because I have lived with the fictionalized characters so long that I don't even remember some of the names, but the guy who planted the bomb was a guy named John Harvey Adamson, and this was Bowles had done a tremendous amount of reporting on everything. Somebody sent me some stack of Republics from the 60s they wanted to get rid of, early 60s. And the first front page I look at is just some general assignment story, and the byline is Don Bowles. So, I mean, he'd written a lot of stuff, but he really earned his chops as an investigative reporter writing about land fraud, which was very ubiquitous in the old days before it went legit, as it is now. And you think I'm joking, but you know, I can call on a deputy county attorney who will assure you that it's not a joke. These arrests were very, very speedy, and there were trials and then retrials, and but there was a question of who was the Mr. Big in the background who ordered this, because these appeared to be, two of them appeared to be kind of nobodies, and the other was a contractor who was respectable, and people were surprised that it was him. But nobody ever thought that justice was really done, which is why it's captivated people for so many years. So much has been written on it. At the time, the organization, Investigative Reporters and Editors, of which I used to be a member, they sent in a team that camped out at the Hotel Adams, and with the kind of idea that, you know, if you try to kill one of us, we're all going to come after you. And so they attempted to give Phoenix this very long, in-depth proctology exam, which it certainly needed. I don't know how much new ground they broke, because reporters from the Republic and the Gazette, and they competed against each other, and from New Times, were doing their own work, and then even the Scottsdale Progress was involved in the IRE team. So there was a tremendous amount of dirt that came out, and a lot of it was unearthed by local reporters, not necessarily the IRE people, but the IRE people unearthed for the broader country just a lot of the corruption that is central Arizona, that is metropolitan Phoenix, which is not the same as Arizona. Arizona is this whole state that's so different than Phoenix, even South Chandler. And so I think there was a general consensus that justice was never done. There was a lot of fear in the city, and now 40 years later, Sheriff Peralta kind of throws this Mapstone's way, and they both stumble into the rabbit hole, and the stakes are deadly.
So a salient point is that it's really unlikely that John Harvey Adamson, all of his own volition, would have just one day blown up a reporter. You know, why would he do that? So he was almost surely a tool of somebody else. And I think the contractor is the one that there's been a lot of debate about whether he was in fact ever really involved in it or just got caught up in it, but I might be wrong about that.
No, you are absolutely right.
But then there's a whole lot in different places. My father was a forever member of Paradise Valley Country Club, and the wisdom in the locker room there pointed to a particular person here in Phoenix, and it was, the general idea was that it was like Henry II and the guys that killed Thomas à Becket, you know, well, no one rid me of this murderous priest, so maybe it was this guy, and I'm not mentioning him on Facebook, but I will when we turn it off. And, you know, these were just people who thought they could curry favor with him by, you know, taking this guy out. So he might not have been directly involved, but then he certainly could have been. You know, who really knows? There's never been a definitive answer.
Well, I give one, and it is one very real possibility. The one thing about the Bowles case, and the one thing about this case, which is the reporter works for the Phoenix Gazette, his name is Charles Page, aka Front Page, is that organized crime and La Cosa Nostra have incredibly deep roots in Phoenix. It goes all the way back to Prohibition. And then, you know, the richest man in the state had deep, deep ties to organized crime. And their murder was quite common. I mean, they're 3 blocks away from where I grew up was where Gus Greenbaum and his wife were cooking steaks, and they were prepared to sit down and eat them when the hitmen came in and killed them both. And yes, it is true, they sat down and ate the steaks, and then the hitmen departed. And I mean, this is very common.
Well, remind us who Gus Greenbaum was for people who don't know.
Well, Phoenix was kind of it was kind of open territory. It was not like Tucson, which was first claimed by the Purple Gang out of Detroit in the 20s, and then was claimed by Joe Bonanno. Phoenix never had a godfather. The Chicago outfit was very prominent here, but Phoenix was kind of neutral territory. And you could work your angles here as long as you followed certain rules if you were a made man. But the closest thing that we had to a godfather up until 1958 was a man named Gus Greenbaum, who was sent here by the Chicago outfit to set up a gambling wire. Western Union, for those of you who are older than me, and I'm only 27, will remember that telegrams were sent, and Western Union would not have appreciated you going down to Union Station and sending a telegram with your betting information to your bookie or whatever. And so these organized crime outfits like the Chicago outfit actually set up wires to connect nationwide gambling, and Phoenix was one of those hubs, and Greenbaum set it up. But he was also a magnificent manager, and so when was it Bugsy Siegel flamed out in Vegas, and the mob was in danger of losing all of its investment in a very much smaller Las Vegas. Gus was called in to clean up the casino, and he did, and he got it on a solid footing, and he was the master of the skim, and the skim is what the mob can take off the top before it has the books go to the regulators. And on the skim, there's other skims. I mean, in other words, Gus could, within the boundaries of the family, so to speak, Gus could take a skim for himself off the skim. He finally got into trouble because of cocaine women and taking too much of the skim, and he was warned 3 times. I believe they typically warn you that many times, and then the hitmen showed up for dinner. But Gus continued to be this master manager of the casinos in Vegas, but he kept his home in Palmcroft, and he wanted to come back to Phoenix and retire. He was good friends with Barry Goldwater. He moved easily within Phoenix society, but the outfit wouldn't let him because they needed him to run these casinos. And finally, the pressure of that and his drug habits and all of that caused the mob to say, "Okay, go back to Phoenix." But he was torn. Once he got back here, he got bored and he wanted to go run a casino, so he went back to Vegas and he started skimming too much. And then he was back home, and that was when they decided to take him out because he was out of control. But later there was I think it was Buddy Tucko who was kind of a godfather. But Phoenix never really had a godfather or 5 families or something like that. It was open territory. But Gus Greenbaum, especially until 1958, was as close as you get, and yet he was close to everybody in Phoenix leadership. And Barry Goldwater went to his funeral.
Tell me about Harry Rosenzweig, because I was fascinated with that whole story.
Well, you can't libel a dead person.
Right. Trust me, I checked on this before we published this book.
The Rosenzweig family was one of the early merchant prince families of Phoenix, and they ran Rosenzweig Jewelers, and it passed on to Harry and his brother Newton. And Newton I actually had a chance to interview when I came back here because he was still alive, fascinating man. Harry Rosenzweig was probably the father of the Arizona Republican Party, because up until 1952, Arizona was solid Democratic. Now, this was a very different Democratic Party and a very different Republican Party, but Arizona was both a western and a southern state culturally. And so Harry, all through the 1940s, there was tremendous corruption in City Hall, which was no different going back to 1875, except that Phoenix was bigger, 65,000, and had a business community that was tired of being taken advantage of by city council and the corrupt city commissioners, rather. And so Harry Rosenzweig really started pushing Republican candidates to run for city council because they did away with the city commission on a reform ticket. And one of the people that Harry picked was a department store owner named Barry Goldwater, young Barry Goldwater. And this is actually out of the Rosenzweig papers that Harry and Barry are joking with each other about the charter reform ticket, and Barry says to Harry Rosenzweig, "We're running against everything that we like," because it was against vice and against gambling and against prostitution and all of these things. Harry was a major business leader. And this was in a city, and even a city by that time, one of the larger cities in America, 500,000 people. He could get what he wanted. People would go to Rosenzweig Jewelers, wait downstairs to be summoned up to the Holy of Holies, and Harry would decide yay or nay. To what degree was Harry involved in organized crime is an open question, but what I will say is that Harry Rosenzweig, Barry Goldwater, and Del Webb all like to run in a fast crowd. Now, this is very different than the Barry Goldwater that people think of. This stodgy old conservative. Or how today they'll say, well, Barry changed. Barry didn't change. Conservatism changed. Barry was a swordsman. He was a drinker. He was an Air Force pilot. He was profane. He loved to run with mobsters. And so one gets into perilous territory when we say, well, was Barry Goldwater mobbed up? Was Harry Rosenzweig mobbed up? Was Del Webb mobbed up, building those casinos in Las Vegas? It's an interesting question. It's one that Mapstone tries to answer. It's not one that can be answered definitively because, especially in Old Phoenix, the line between organized crime and quote-unquote respectable Phoenix was so porous that people moved back and forth between that. And that was even true into the 1970s when Midtown Phoenix was this combination of North Scottsdale and South Chandler and a little bit of Las Vegas. Had all these great bars. We had a Playboy Club. It was a happening place.
Well, there was a lot of glamour attached. Think about Sinatra and that crowd, and think about Miami. There was a lot of glamour attached to running with these kind of bad guys, where you wouldn't necessarily be one yourself, but, it was racy, and they liked that. The other thing I think that, only us seniors can remember, it really took two things. It took refrigerated air conditioning, that was the really big thing, and the interstate highway system, and jet travel eventually to bring people west, to bring people to Phoenix. So these guys, it was really started to boom in the 50s, right? And then in the 70s, we're still trying to reinvent what was, as you've always pointed out, this lovely agricultural paradise is suddenly turning into Sun City and all kinds of other stuff. And these guys were part of that whole, but there's an awful lot of money washing around, land fraud, the whole bit, right?
Yeah, I mean...
It's Machiavellian action, if you really think about it. Power corrupts. Gus Greenbaum is a great example of that, isn't it?
Some of this, I mean, it was still American Eden in the 1970s.
Right.
If you came here after 1980, I feel sorry for you, but you still saw a little bit of it. But
Right.
we've lost so much, and I've lived in cities all over the country. I've never seen one that lost so much, and I'll just leave it at that. You know, Talton hates Arizona. I have thought a lot about why Phoenix didn't grow until the 50s, and I think everything that Barbara said is true. But I think there's other things. When you look at places like Houston and Dallas, which are hotter than hell. I mean, the hottest day I ever spent in my life was in Dallas, Texas, and I'm a Phoenix native. And yet they were big cities in the early 1900s and even the late 19th century. The big thing with Phoenix was isolation and kind of the demographic center of the country. Because when people saw westerns in the movies, they'd never seen anything like this territory. Now everybody's seen it and helped destroy it. Like I remember when there was no Prescott Valley. But the other thing was that Phoenix was so isolated by these mountains to the east that the big thing that changed the growth trajectory for Phoenix was the coming of the railroads, and especially the completion of the Southern Pacific Northern Main Line, which took all of their passenger trains except for one through Phoenix. And so finally Phoenix was reachable. And so this began even before air conditioning became a big thing. Phoenix began growing big time once the railroads were completed. This only picked up in the 1950s, but Atlanta was a big city before air conditioning. Phoenix wasn't, because it was so far away and it was so isolated. And now it's the largest city in the country by far that has no Amtrak service.
No, you have to come down from Flagstaff, all true. But you know, the process you're talking about, I mean, Rob and I made our first cruise to Alaska in 1989, and the cruise industry is almost single-handedly ruining Alaska. It certainly ruined Southeast Alaska, for sure. And now, I was looking the other day, first time we went to Greenland, there was one little city at the very southern end of Greenland that you could stop at. And now, there's a cruise going out, 3 cruises going out this summer, and that's what they're doing. They're circling Greenland, and they're stopping all around Greenland. I mean, it's like, how did that happen, right? So remoteness, is constantly being eroded as transportation and so forth is bringing people there. And the reasons people wanted to go are going to disappear. I mean, that's just true, not just in Phoenix, true in Alaska, true in Greenland. If you go to Barcelona now, do you know you have time tickets to go see anything? I mean, it's unbelievable what has happened, with cheap travel.
Phoenix is a city I love.
Well, I understand that, but my point is it isn't just Phoenix. Look at Houston, where they have paved over the entire drainage system, so it's going to flood forever.
Houston is a disaster, but
Yeah.
Phoenix has unique challenges. We won't get into that tonight because we're all friends, we're all happy. Please buy my flipped house. But Phoenix has unusual challenges for a city and a metropolitan area this big.
True.
And I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. Yes, we've got too many people on the planet. Not everybody needs to go everywhere. We have a lot of disposable income, but Phoenix lost a lot.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I'm just saying it's not unique in that respect.
No, it is unique in its respect versus other large American cities, but that's for another time.
Okay, all right. So, Jana, you're here. Do you have some comments you'd like to make about the Bowles case? You were a reporter working on it and so forth.
I'm fascinated to read this book. I'm just fascinated to read this.
Well, seriously, what are your memories of it? Why don't we, John, do you want to give her your microphone for a moment?
I held it out.
Oh, good. This is Jana Bommersbach, who was also a reporter and a longtime reporter with the Arizona Republic.
Well, I was in the newsroom the day that Don Bowles was blown up,
Were
and
you?
nobody knew what had happened at first. We thought that because Don had gone to cover the legislature and said that he was tired of trying to do investigative reporting. Remember this, John? Because the Republic wouldn't support him editorially. He'd do all these investigations and show all this stuff, and then the Republic editorial pages would just ignore it. So, like, there was no like push. There was no institutional push behind his great work, and he got fed up with that and went to the legislature. But you know, a good hound dog never stops, and a good investigative reporter, you give them a clue, and the clue that drew him to the Clarendon was that Sam Steiger there was proof that Sam Steiger was involved in the mob, and that they finally had proof of this, and so he went.
That was what was dangled.
That was the dangle, right? That was the dangle. So off he goes. It happened to be his anniversary, by the way, and that night he was going to go see All the President's Men. That was the plan. And, you know, the Republic went nuts. I mean, as you can imagine, they just went absolutely nuts. They thought, at first we thought,
Al Sitter?
Yeah, where's Al Sitter? Because Al Sitter was the big investigative reporter, and the first thing that came out of anybody's mouth was, where is Al Sitter? He must be the guy. And then someone called back and they said, well, there's a press pass on the window, and it's from the Capitol. They went, who the hell could that be? You know,
Nobody knew who it was in the car.
No one knew who it was in the car. And Don didn't come running to mind because we thought, this guy's not doing this anymore, you know? So and then after that there was this incredible chaos, and there continues to be chaos. And John's absolutely right. I mean, it is so frustrating that they never got the big guy. And there are a lot of theories about who that big guy is, but it was so frustrating that they could never nail that down. And there were people in this town who knew damn well who that was that day. The calls coming from Washington, D.C. to Phoenix, Arizona, the day that Don was blown up, give you great clues about who knew what about what. And I think that, John, you're covering that in your book, it sounds. So, that kind of thing. So, it was very frustrating and very, it still is. Because Don was a friend of ours and a friend of mine. And that night I went to the hospital, and his wife, Rosalie, was sedated, and she heard my voice and said, let her in, and she just kept saying, they won't let me see him, and I can't, what's going on? And of course they were amputating his limbs one at a time, trying to save his life. And I just saw her recently. She was here we had a celebration a couple years ago to recreate some of the thoughts about the Don Bowles murder, and Rosalie came with one of her kids and a grandchild, and we got a chance to see her again, and of course the pain is still just there. And his car now, I believe, is in the News Museum, right? In Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
So it's an iconic Arizona story, and I'm very glad that you tackled this. I'm very glad. I'm really anxious to see, exactly what you all did with it. But I know it's going to be good because
Hope so.
I know the quality of your work. So.
Well, let me reiterate that John does not, give you a definitive solution. Right. He imagines one, and also I think he's written it with great respect, for the pain for the Bowles and the Bowles family and his colleagues, and all the players. I mean, I thought you did a wonderful job with it. I had no idea what I was going to be getting from you when you told me what you wanted to do.
Thank you. I
That's great praise.
And thank you for making it better. And when you said it's a thrilling story, I knew I was onto something. To take all of this, much of which is very complicated, and turn it into a compelling mystery, it's the hardest book that I ever wrote. And but yeah, they knew, and they hushed it up, and that's why Mapstone is gonna just break things and get us to the bottom of it.
I think what I like the best is the way you give the reasons for the hush up. The hush up is, that I thought you can talk about in, definitively is why would everybody want to cover it up? And I think it's a very powerful part of the book. So it's
remember, my mother was deeply involved in aspects of that, not the cover up, but who knows? I never had a chance to ask her.
I think the really terrifying question for me is, what on earth are you going to write next about Mapstone? We haven't even talked about that.
Well,
You
I'm
going to
sure.
surprise me right here?
I'm sure we have questions from the audience.
Notice the deflection.
What I have pitched to Barbara is that I would love to write a James Elroy-like mystery set in Phoenix in the 1930s, with cops and robbers and bad guys, and Barbara has had like zero enthusiasm for that. And
Zero.
And I'm, well, okay, 1.00001. And I understand the compelling reason for series. For an author, it can be kind of like getting an STD that you can't get rid of. I mean, to me, at the end of this book, and again, you should read some others before you read this, but to me, at the end of this book, things are just kind of as they should be. I'm not telling you how it ends, or who dies, or who lives, or any of these things, but things, I'm leaving it in a good place, whatever should happen to me. I may write more Mapstones, but if I don't, it won't be like the end of The Night Detectives or High Country Nocturne. And God, I look back on The Night Detectives and I think, oh, there's so much more I wish I could have done there. With the bomb shelter, I did the best I could. I did the best I could with the skills I've learned over 20 years of writing mystery novels and becoming more and more aware of my limitations every year. So I guess we're going to have to work it out. It is. I'm not as fast as I used to be, and I was very poor and made poor choices in my parents, and we were rich in love, but they don't take love at the store. But maybe another Mapstone, who knows?
Well, we're flexible. Janice,
I have an
over here.
idea for you.
That's what every author
Will
wants to
you
hear.
do the work?
No. But you want to set about a book in Phoenix in the 30s, you should do the Winnie Ruth Judd case.
Oh my God, I wouldn't go near your book,
You
Jana.
should do a fictionalized version. That would be a fabulous Mapstone. It would. It really would.
I might do a little bit of that. I mean, I've kind of always left that to you, because you literally wrote the book on it.
But use my book, and then you got all the research is done. So you
Great. I mean, thank you. I have never had tape permission to write before.
We've got it recorded.
Yeah.
Speaking of which, I think this would be a great.
You'll have that at the end of the week.
Okay, that'll be your proposal. I think this would be a great moment to say thank you to our Facebook audience for joining us and watching it.